Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. They were recently seen together during a state visit by Russia to North Korea. It looked like they both had a very pleasant experience spending time with each other. All jokes aside, I want to talk about why their meeting mattered, and also the reasons why the mutual defense agreement they've signed is very interesting in the context of North Korean and Russian relations. Before we further explore modern Russian and North Korean relations, I think it would be only fitting if we start at the beginning. The story of North Korean and Russian relations began at the end of the Second World War. In 1945, Korea was liberated from Japanese occupation. The Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel, with the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south. This division paved the way for the formation of two separate Korean states. Back then, the division between the two Koreas was expected to be temporary, with most people hoping that it would lead to a unified Korea eventually. The Soviet Union helped establish a communist government in Northern Korea. This new government was led by Kim Il-sung, a Korean nationalist and communist. Prior to the formation of North Korea, Kim Il-sung spent considerable time in the Soviet Union, where he received military training and formed close relationships with Soviet officials. His understanding of Soviet culture and politics, as well as his allegiance to the Soviet Union, made him the perfect candidate for the Soviets. During the Second World War, Kim Il-sung even served in the Soviet Red Army. This service not only provided him with military experience, but also further cemented his relationship with the Soviets. And it's not like the Soviets had so many different options. At the time, there were only few other Korean leaders with similar credentials and strong ties to the Soviet Union. So, Kim Il-sung's unique background made him a standout choice among the available candidates. Looking back, I think it's very fair to say that the Russian and North Korean relations have never been as strong as they were in the very first years after the founding of North Korea. In the beginning of this new Korean state, the Soviets played a crucial role in building North Korea's military infrastructure. They provided weapons, training, and advisors to strengthen North Korea's military capabilities. In addition to military support, the Soviets also gave a helping hand in the economic development of North Korea. They helped establish state-run industries and collectivized agriculture, laying the foundation for the North Korea we know today. Shortly after the foundation of the North Korean state in 1948, came the Korean War. The Korean War began on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces, with Soviet approval and support, invaded South Korea. However, Soviet involvement was kept somewhat covert to avoid direct confrontation with the United States and its allies. Throughout the war, the Soviets provided logistical support and military advisors to North Korea. They also played a crucial role in diplomatic efforts. Particularly at the United Nations, they often used their veto power to influence resolutions regarding the conflict. Overall, one could look at the situation back then and fairly assess that the Soviet support for North Korea was part of their broader Cold War strategy, mainly to expand communist influence in Asia and counteract US presence. After the armistice on 27 July 1953, Korea remained divided, just like before the war. After the Korean War was over, it was clear that the North would stay a communist state against the capitalist South. Kim Il-sung suddenly had to play a diplomatic balancing game due to the nature of Russian and Chinese relations. The Sino-Soviet split began in the late 1950s, and it became particularly heated in the early 1960s. During this time, North Korea tried to maintain a balance between the Soviet Union and China. Kim Il-sung tried to avoid alienating either power, as both were crucial for North Korea's existence. Kim Il-sung very often played one ally against the other to maximize benefits for himself and his country. He would express support for both the Soviet Union and China at different times, depending on the situation at hand. In early 1960s, initially North Korea leaned more towards China. As the Chinese Cultural Revolution resonated with Kim Il-sung's own efforts to consolidate power and promote his version of Korean socialism. Ironically, as the Sino-Soviet split deepened, North Korea began to distance itself from China. Late 1960s to early 1970s was a period of reapproachment to the Soviets by the North Koreans. Even though China also continued its support to North Korea, the dynamics of the Chinese and North Korean relations were more volatile due to the internal Chinese politics. The era of Sino-Soviet split kind of forced North Korea to develop its own ideological path. Kim Il-sung named this self-reliance. He promoted this type of thinking to assert North Korea's independence from the two major countries he found himself stuck in between. This new policy emphasized the importance of Korean nationalism and self-sufficiency. It allowed Kim Il-sung to strengthen his control over the country and reduce dependence on external powers. When you really think about it, the Sino-Soviet split ultimately led to a more cautious and independent North Korean foreign policy. At this point, the Kim family had a very strong grip on North Korea already. Being forced to act more independently made them even stronger figures domestically. Following the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, Russia experienced significant political, economic, and social changes. These changes, of course, had a big impact on Russia's foreign policy, including their relationship with North Korea. Since then, the relationship between Russia and North Korea has been volatile due to geopolitical, economic, and security issues. In the early 1990s, Russia, led by President Boris Yeltsin, distanced itself from North Korea in order to strengthen ties with the West. This meant there would be a significant reduction in support that would go to North Korea from Russia, especially compared to the previous levels of military and economic support they were used to getting from the Soviet Union. Of course, this deepened North Korean economic difficulties even further than they already were. I mean, don't get me wrong, economics-wise, North Korea was never sunshine and rainbows, but losing the level of support they were getting from the Soviet Union was a really hard hit for them. Even though Boris Yeltsin tried to lead Russia down to a different path, Yeltsin's liberal reforms caused widespread hardship and discontent of the West in Russia. This was compounded by NATO's expansion and interventions, which were viewed by both the leadership and the public as threats to Russian interests. When Vladimir Putin ultimately rose to power in 2000, he aimed to restore national stability, consolidate power, and reaffirm Russia's global influence. Economic recovery under Putin, fueled by rising oil prices, laid the groundwork for a more independent and assertive foreign policy, a significant departure from Yeltsin's era. This, of course, included North Korea. The first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian President Vladimir Putin made the first Russian state visit to North Korea in July 2000. This visit re-established high-level contacts between the two countries, indicating a renewed emphasis on their bilateral relationship. It definitely emphasized Russia's desire to assert its influence in East Asian geopolitics, while balancing the presence of the US and China. One thing is for sure, under the rule of Vladimir Putin, North Korea and Russia are more similar today than they were 24 years ago. They both have the same characteristics, such as authoritarian leadership, international isolation, and economic challenges. Both countries face severe sanctions and diplomatic isolation from the West. This fuels strong anti-Western sentiment and drives closer cooperation. If we assess the current situation, it seems like future cooperation between North Korea and Russia is very likely. But still, only time will tell if they will have another slow fallout or get even closer to each other in the future.